Hi, my name is Taylor Tolliver, and I'm doing my project on the discrimination against Black women. I'm doing this because, one, women have been discriminated against for centuries, and when we think of discrimination against Blacks, we think of discriminations against Black men. Now, what about women? So, here we go.
As far as I know of, there's always been discrimination.
Branch you look and the candles, you really turn this up on its head. And
How did it affect
I'm
you
so
when you were
impressed.
growing
I
up?
really am. You created a
Or the
really
way it was
beautiful
then
sort of
versus the way it is
shaker
now?
antique moment. I love it.
Thanks.
When I was growing up,
Definitely kind of Instagram famous.
yeah,
It's had many
it
different
was
versions.
black and
I
white.
just love styling it.
The
It's just
black people were together.
Well, and you guys are all
The black
very,
people were together.
social media
We
famous,
had black
and I'm so
communities
honored that you had come
and white
on this
communities.
show.
The
And
blacks
this
stayed
been so
was in the
much fun.
black
Thank you
communities.
so much
We
for
had
being
black
here.
schools
And if you want to see even
and
more
white
design
schools.
ideas from Kate, Carly, and Jenny, go to our website where we will be celebrating them on the Drew
I
Barrymore
really don't know how to
Show.com.
really
Now,
explain
we're
it.
gonna keep the dresser towel
But we
going.
knew we were black. We knew where we
And
knew
the
where
next
we
one was specially designed by our next
we
guest.
walked through the white community.
I first
To
fell
go
in
to
love
school
with
to
her
a-
in
to a
movie
black
called
school.
Kick-Ass. Then she was in 500 Days of Summer,
So
the Amityville Horror. She's been acting since she was 5 years old.
Did you
I really can't explain it.
did you feel like you were treated differently because you were black?
Series, The Addams Family recently, Neighbors 2.
Well,
It's Chloe Grace Moretz.
it's a yes, I did.
So I was born in 1959. That means that I was a child of the 60s. During the civil rights movement is the time that I was growing up. I do have memories of the assassination of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King. But other things that I have memories of is that being one of the first children to integrate racially into the public schools, there were many activities that I was not allowed to participate in. For example, I could not join the Girl Scouts at the local school that I attended because it was a white school and I was a black child, so they said if I wanted to be in the Girl Scouts, I had to go to the chapter across town. I was not allowed to go to the Girls Club. One of my very best friends, a little girl named Martille Pittman, went to the Girls Club every afternoon after school where they learned all kinds of crafts and that type of thing, and I wasn't allowed to be a participant in that because of course we were not allowed to swim in the same pool with white children, and they had a pool at the Girls Club. As I have continued to grow and thrive in these United States, I have learned to accept people for where they are in life. And one of the things that I am aware of is that, or one of the things that I believe is that race is a bigger issue for black people than it is for white people. And that is that for us it is ever present. For white people, it's something that they really don't think about unless they are confronted with it. So I do think that that's part of the reason why there's such a discrepancy in how we view race.
I'm very lucky to be a pediatrician, but I have experienced plenty of times walking around the hospital and having people not realize that I'm the doctor and assume that I have some other job that they think is more likely something that someone who looks like me would be doing. I think that there are times when I am driving alone or stopping by the gas station or things like that, where I worry for my safety and wonder if there's a chance that something bad will happen to me because I'm Black. And there are plenty of times where I feel that jolt of fear as I'm crossing the street and I see a cop car and wonder if they're going to decide to harass me or follow me or something like that. So all of those things go through my mind, just kind of living my life as a Black person in the US.
Being Black in the United States is interesting because one moment we're creating and setting all these trends for people to follow, and then the next thing you know, we're the face of the news because one of us has been killed for absolutely no reason. Either we're digging in our pockets or we look suspicious. So that's what it's like, at least from my perspective. I love it though.
Well, I have been a participant in 2 male-dominated professions, and when I started at Georgia Tech, the ratio of males to female was 8-1, and we still had teachers who clearly stated that they believed that engineering was a profession reserved for males, and so they did not make things easy for us. This actually continued into the workplace, where it was not unusual for me to be on a job where I was the only female. Now, in truth, there was not really overt discrimination. However, things either went one way or the other. I was treated as one of the boys, in which case there would be blatant disrespect, and they would make off-color jokes as it related to females and comments of that sort, or I was treated like a China doll, rather than just a colleague with whom you respected. In terms of being a female doctor, I have had patients who have just denied that they've even seen a doctor that day. I've gone into the hospital room, I've made rounds on the patients, and later that day, at the end of the day, the parents would say that they have not seen a doctor at all. So there is still quite a lot of latent discrimination and just expectations from a woman in the professional field, and in particular those fields which I have chosen to participate.
As far as what it's like being a woman in the US, I think that a lot of the same things actually hold true. I feel a lot of fear and worry for some other reasons. I think a lot of the time about what I'm wearing as I'm walking down the street, whether the person who is catcalling me is going to also follow me, or whether there's any chance of any kind of violence happening because of that. Same thing with going to the gas station. I also wonder if I'm safe in those settings, but just kind of for a different reason. And as far as like my professional life, there is also this expectation of the roles that women have in the hospital, and so people are still surprised again that I'm a doctor because there are fewer women in these roles. And you end up also seeing, like as I think about my future in my career, and I think about where I would like to be, you realize that there are fewer and fewer women in powerful roles, kind of as you go through the ladder. And so you then wonder to yourself, is it because they're not as good, which I don't think is the reason. I know it's not the reason, or because there is discrimination in who gets what kind of credit or who gets moved up the ladder along the way. And so that's something that I think about also in my life.
Being a young woman in the United States has been pretty normal for me thus far. I mean, of course, since I was like a teenager, I used to get catcalled, especially in my neighborhood. But, you know, I choose to ignore it. But, you know, unfortunately, there have been so many cases where women can't ignore it and escape these men, and they end up either getting killed or harassed. So it's quite an experience.
It's very hard to say because I've always been black and I've always been female. There are some pretty clear disparities in terms of both being a black woman and in terms of being black and being a woman. I'd say it's better to be a black woman because people expect a certain type of mental toughness that I carry with me. And I believe that white men are more accepting of working with a black woman than they are of working with a white woman. Again, this arises from my having been in two male-dominated fields. I think as a pediatrician, my kids love it. They love that I'm a female. I think that I am a role model for my young black females. I hear that a lot, and that makes me feel good, that to know that success is possible. I do believe that I have had to work harder for everything that I have achieved because people don't expect very much. You have to prove yourself. You have to be excellent in all ways. And this sometimes is an additional stress that others don't have, because if you make one mistake, then it's going to be about you being black or you being a female or both, rather than saying that's a doctor who made a mistake. So there are clear disparities.
And then as far as what it's like being a black woman in the US, I think that actually is an easier question for me to think about, just because it's hard to tease out what is my experience as a black person, what is my experience as a woman, because so many of those things end up overlapping or looking a little different because of having both of those identities. And so I think when I mentioned before the fear of like police violence or driving down the road or things like that, I think of Sandra Bland, who was a black woman who died in police custody a few years ago. Or I think about Breonna Taylor, who is sleeping in her own home and is a healthcare professional, and therefore is one of the heroes that the world was celebrating last year. And yet she also died by police violence and did not get justice. I think of all of the children, teenagers, young women, so many people who experience danger and violence because of these experiences. And I think about how they don't necessarily get the same attention or get the same protection. And it even goes down to this biological version of that, where black women have higher rates of maternal mortality. And I've seen that in my real life. I have a friend who got really sick after having her baby and had delays in her care. And she's a black woman doctor and still ended up having those problems. And so I worry about what that means for my life. At the same time, I think that because of these struggles. As a Black woman, I see a lot of very powerful, really inspiring Black women who are leaders, people who are making change, people who are making the world change for them. And so I feel inspired and feel like I'm a part of a really important legacy of Black women. And I don't think that it should have to be that way. We shouldn't have to be strong, or we shouldn't have to be so much more inspiring to get to where we are, but that is kind of where we are. And I am grateful for those women, both the ones who are publicly known as well as women in my family, like my mom and my grandma and my aunts and so many others. And so it is this kind of double experience of feeling fear and concern, as well as feeling proud and feeling inspired by this identity that I've been given.
Malcolm X once said that the most unprotected person in the United States is a Black woman. And it sadly still stands. I mean, we get antagonized all the time, whether it's in the corporate world, the real world, sometimes even by our own people who are literally birthed by Black women. But we're supposed to be sticking together, and sometimes we just tear each other apart, and I guess that stands for everybody.
In answer to the fourth question, overall, what is it like for Black women in the United States? I think because of prejudgments, in some ways we have it easier, and in some ways we have a tougher road to hoe. Meaning that on the one hand, people expect that we will be pregnant at 15 and have a lot of children, and with plans on living on the welfare system. On the other hand, if we're in the professional world, they will assume that we are tough and difficult to get along with. I think most people consider us, by most people I mean men, and I mean this in terms of Black men and white men, we are considered a bigger threat. And I think it's because we learn early that we have to work hard to get what we want, and if we are successful, it's a result of hard work and being tough. And so I think this is true in general for women in the United States, Black women in the United States.
And as far as what I think about the experience of most Black women in the U.S., I think that most Black women are doing their best with a society that does not give them what they need and does not support them when they ask for what they need. People who don't have enough money for food and housing and the kind of little things that keep your life going. There are so many people who can't meet their basic needs, and disproportionately more of them are Black women, and that's because our society has built in layers of racism and sexism, as well as multiple other isms that make it harder for Black women to get ahead and thrive. And again, so many of them, because of that, are exceptionally strong, exceptionally powerful and inspiring. But that also has its own cost. The stress that people carry and the weight of living through all of these kind of overlapping oppressions kills people. Like, it actually shortens people's lifespans, it makes them sicker and all of those things. And I think it's not fair that people have to go through their lives feeling these multiple types of isms in their lives, even if it makes them strong or powerful or things like that. We would much rather be supported and feel safe and be able to achieve happiness than to have to be the strong black woman that is the kind of trope that people are used to.
I think we all can say that we've experienced different yet similar experiences, whether we're light skin, dark skin, brown skin, it doesn't matter. Yeah, we've all experienced gender inequality, colorism, racism, but at the end of the day, even though we're not that protected, we're all just trying to get through our lives in our own lanes. That's it.
You just watched interviews with my grandmother, my mom, my sister, and my friend Asia, who's also a SCAD student. This is not about me, but I did want to add a few things. I was lucky enough to grow up in a household of a doctor and engineer. So I definitely grew up lucky, but I still think people assume, they look at me like they're expecting failure. And I'm not a failure. I'm a black, proud woman. I'm an educated woman, and I'm proud to be that. Also, when I remember as a child, I wanted white Barbies. I thought white Barbies were prettier than black Barbies, and that kind of still applies today. According to several studies, black women are the least attractive out of everyone, and it hurts. Because we are strong, we are beautiful, and I want the world to see that. Thank you.